Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome, welcome. My name's Mark, and this is my first video, actually, in a series that I'm going to be doing. I call it My Music Lesson, and I'm going to just be doing some basic tutorials to help you musicians out there or aspiring musicians to get started with your guitar. So what we're going to talk about today is actually guitar tuning, and this is not quite as easy as it sounds. It does involve some basic concepts, which I'm going to talk to you about today. And I'm going to go on the basis that you're starting from scratch. So for those of you who have seen this information before, then please bear with me. And for those of you who are starting from scratch, like I say, I'll try and cover the bases as best I can. Anyways, the first place we need to start is actually understanding the musical alphabet. Again, when we talk on piano, we very often talk about the C major scale from C to C. And but in guitar, it would suffice to just go from A to the letter G, no H's. Okay, so basically we have the musical alphabet running from A to G. Were it that simple, we actually on the guitar are dealing with a certain set of notes in what we call standard tuning, and those notes are. Now, there are a lot of funny things we do as musicians, and one of them is talking about tops and bottoms, and people talk about thick strings and thin strings and all those different types of descriptions. Basically, what we're looking at here, the E is the thickest. We refer to it as the sixth string. It is also the bottom string because of the sound that we hear when we play that string. Okay, so it's the low sounding string. I'll demonstrate this with a guitar in a minute, but basically, so you've got the thickest or the sixth string, it's the bottom or the lowest sounding string. We go from there, E to A to D to G to B to E. This is the thinnest, the top, or the first string. I apologize, I'm not following a script. We've got the sixth as the bottom and the top is the first, but hopefully you get the idea. If you're ever confused about direction on the guitar, think about what you hear, okay? If I just grab my acoustic, I can show you. So in general terms then, if I'm going to pick the thickest string, just physically on the top, okay, we refer to this as the bottom string because it's the lowest sounding string, okay? If I pick the thinnest string on the other side, okay, that's the highest or the top string, okay? So technically, if we're talking about moving across the strings, we're moving up a string as we move towards the floor, honest, and moving down is the opposite way. In terms of across the fretboard, if we want to move up the guitar, we're moving towards our body. And if we want to move down, we're moving away. Okay? So just some basics of communication in terms of direction on the guitar and how it's organized. Okay, so from that first discussion, we've pretty much established that standard tuning is indeed the E, the A, the D, the G, the B, and the E. Okay? Again, working from the thickest or the sixth, to the first string or the thin string, okay? Now, if you are using a guitar tuner, okay, there's a difference between what we refer to as a guitar tuner and a chromatic tuner, okay? A guitar tuner is built to strictly recognize these notes. It will recognize the E, the A, the D, the G, the B, and the E, okay? Some guitar tuners refer to them by their number, okay? And others refer to them by their letter name. But a guitar tuner is meant to, or designed to, strictly recognize the standard notes on the guitar. Notice you won't find an F in this grouping, you won't find a C in this grouping, and you won't find any of those silly sharps or flats, as we call them, in that grouping, okay? So basically what we're looking at is a set of strings. Okay, so when you're using a guitar tuner, your guitar needs to be close to the notes that we expect to have the strings be in order to be in tune. Now the other option is what we call a chromatic tuner. Okay, a chromatic tuner will recognize any note in the scale. Okay, so let's just say for instance that your fourth string here, okay, should be a D. Okay. But let's say that that D is quite loose. The string has been, somebody's been playing with it or it was out of adjustment. So that D may be closer to a C or a C sharp, in which case the tuner will tell you, it will register that, hey, you're playing the fourth string, but I'm hearing C sharp, okay? Or if it's even lower, it might register as a C, okay? So not only, when we get into the tuning demonstration, I'll show you this, but not only do we want to have the needle in the middle, if it's a traditional needle tuner, but we also have to make sure that the right note is lighting up. So if we're tuning that fourth string, we want to make sure that the note that is lighting up is indeed a D note, okay? I would highly recommend, if you're in the market for a tuner, to purchase again, it's a chromatic tuner, okay? Chromatic means that it has every note in the scale, including sharps and flats and that kind of thing. Okay, now just to follow up a little bit on the chromatic tuner idea and the chromatic concept overall, I'm going to show you the actual, what I refer to as complete musical alphabet. So earlier on in the discussion, I mentioned that, you know, the musical alphabet is basically and then we cycle back. It actually ends up to be a higher alphabet up, but we actually cycle back and start again on the A. Okay? Now you notice in terms of the way that I've spaced these, there's sort of a gap between the A and the B. B and C are side by side. There's a gap between the C and D, the D and E. E and F are side by side. We've got this gap between F and G and a gap between the G coming back to the A or starting the next cycle up. These in-between spots are sort of like the black keys on a piano. Okay? They borrow their names from the notes beside them. We have what we call a sharp. Looks like the pound sign on your telephone or that number sign on the computer. And it raises one, what we call a semitone, okay? It's the equal of 1 fret on the guitar. We also have what we call flats. They look sort of like a small B, okay? They do the opposite. They lower 1 semitone, okay? Again, a semitone is the same thing as moving 1 fret on the guitar. Okay? So basically, if I was to take this A note, okay, for argument's sake, or for example, let's say it was the 2nd fret on the 3rd string, and I move that towards me or up 1 fret, that becomes what we refer to as A sharp. Okay? Not A sharp, but the letter A sharp. Okay. Now, by the same token, I can take a B, which happens to be the 4th fret on the 3rd string, and I can lower it down or back up a fret. Now I end up in the same place, but I can call that B lowered down or B flat. Okay? And so all of these individual spaces or all of these spots in between can be completed the same way. I take my C, I raise it up a fret, I get C sharp. I take my D, lower it down a fret, I'm back at D flat. Okay? Same note, same place. Same thing over here. Same note, same place. The guitar doesn't care what you call it. Your ear doesn't care what you call it. Your fingers don't particularly care what you call it. But in music and in theory and in reading and understanding how the whole thing fits together, there are times we will refer to it as a sharp, and there are times we will refer to it as a flat. That we'll save for later. So over here we've got D sharp, E flat, F sharp, G flat, G sharp, A flat. Okay? Count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You get a nice dozen notes, just like a dozen eggs. Okay? Total. Okay? I've tried over the years to come up with some sayings or some ideas to help reinforce this concept. B to C, be careful. Okay? Whenever you're trying to name the notes on the neck or you're working through some kind of a sequence, be careful. Okay? No sharp or flat between B and C. They are side by side on the fretboard in every case. Okay? I think it was one of my students who came up with the second part. I won't take credit for this. Every fight. So be careful every fight. Yeah, well, E and F are also side by side, and thankfully we musicians don't try and stir it up that often. But yeah, the B to C and the E to F are side by side. All of the others on all instruments, at least in the Western Hemisphere, if we're talking about piano, if we're talking about wind instruments, if we're talking about, well, any other that you can mention. This is a universal concept. And so again, we've got those sharps and flats in between, and be careful every fight. Okay, just before we leave this topic and get into the actual tuning demonstration, I want to talk a little bit about alternate guitar tunings. Now, alternate tunings refer to changing the notes that we're actually tuning the strings to. I would say there are probably two very popular. Could I use the word mainstream? There are two fairly common alternate tunings that I come across on a regular basis. There are some others for some of the real heavy aggressive metal. They do some other things, but anyways, let's start with the basics. The first one is drop D tuning. Okay. Now with drop D tuning, what we're doing is we're going to take the thickest or the sixth string, and instead of tuning it to the E note that it normally would be, we drop it from an E down to a D. Okay. So we're basically lowering or loosening the sixth string so that it's a D note. The big bang for the buck that we get out of this is, if you're familiar with a D chord, when we play a D chord on guitar, in standard tuning, we're limited basically to 4 strings if we're playing it properly with the right hand. In drop D tuning, that D chord expands or can be all 6 strings, okay? And it really has some extra punch with that drop D in there. Keep in mind this affects your other shapes too, like your G chord, for instance. You would have to change the fingering a little bit on that. But anyways, a very popular tuning. The other, before I forget, we refer to this as drop D. Not drop dead, but drop D. The other one is what we call tuning down a semitone. And this is another reason where I mentioned earlier the chromatic tuner is a very good investment. A lot of artists will tune their instrument. Again, let me, you can imagine we're back to having the E for the 6th string here. What we do when we tune down a semitone is we drop each of the strings down a semitone. It's the equivalent of a fret, but in tuning that doesn't really work. It's a semitone. And so we tune each of the strings, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, B flat, and E flat. Okay? So we've just taken every string and lowered it down what we call a half a step or a semitone. This is, the purpose is twofold. It's mostly for the vocalist, okay? For a singer, a semitone is a huge difference. It doesn't look like much on a guitar when you move from 1 fret over, okay? Or on a piano when you move 1 key down. But you try that as a vocalist. Try singing a note, you know, with your guitar where you're comfortable. Take that note down 1 fret, okay? For your voice, that's a big step, okay? So it's primarily for the vocalist. It does give the guitar a little stronger, I shouldn't say, well, yeah, I guess stronger. It's a lower sound, so it's got a little more presence, a little more force to it, okay? And again, you'll see things like T, D, S, T, okay? And that is tune down 1 semitone. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go and find my guitar and my tuner, and we'll take a look at playing around with some different tunings. Thanks.